On today's show, Alex Alexeyev arrested for public intoxication. Next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the future at the third line center position. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about the option of Hendrix Lapierre. Listen, he has been within the Capitals organization for quite some time. The Capitals have tried to retread that tire again and again to no avail. Will next season be the season for Hendrix Lapierre? I'll talk about that a bit later. The big news surrounding Andrew Cristall as he joins the Hershey Bears in the playoffs. Quite an opportunity for Andrew Cristall to show what he has on the bigger stage. Pro hockey, American League hockey, as we saw his career grow quite a bit. One of the last players cut at camp last season. What can we expect from Andrew Cristall? I'll talk about that. But just to get it going here, the big news that, well, I'm going to be honest with you, I was not expecting to talk about was a Capitals player arrested. Really? And to be clear here, I had some reservation about even talking about this. I like to keep this show pretty much about the team and the activities on the ice. But I got quite a bit of requests about what are your thoughts on this whole situation. And well, since he is a Capitals player, I think I will delve into what we know about the Alex Alexeyev situation and just kind of something out there that if there is a topic that you would really like me to talk about this summer, let me know. Hit me up on Twitter or on YouTube, and I'll do my best to talk about those subjects. But quite a bit of questions about my thoughts on Alex Alexeyev, and the optics on this are not good. I'm going to go ahead and say that pro sports in general does not like these kind of situations, whether it be, DWI or, drunken intoxication in any form or fashion that results in being arrested. That's not good optics for you or your franchise. So if you're asking for my knee-jerk reaction, I think the Capitals are probably going to be done with Alex Alexeyev, and that's just my hunch that they don't like that. And the Capitals PR was they didn't want to talk about it a whole lot. They said, we're looking into the situation, but, for a guy that, I'm going to go ahead and say hasn't truly lived up to potential, if you are trying to make a name, if you are trying to work your way into the organization on the highest level, the Capitals, the cream of the crop within the organization, you don't go out into what I'm going to say dumb things like that. And what Alex Alexeyev did was, well, dumb. Before I dive into it here, what do we know about Alex Alexeyev? Is he is the guy, kind of like in a lot of ways Hendrix Lapierre, that it's going to be his year next year. No, next year. Nope, next year. That at the end of the day, how do I perceive Alex Alexeyev as just what he was during the season, as just a depth piece, as a healthy scratch, that if there is an emergency, break glass and take out Alex Alexeyev. That's where he's at. And it's interesting that he was considered at one point one of the future faces on the Capitals blue line. It just never really happened, whether it be that his play made that so or the fact that he got injured. It's never been the right time or the right place for Alex Alexeyev. I remember that it was going to be his season. It was a couple seasons ago, and then the Capitals signed Joel Edmondson, and then he got bumped down the depth chart there again. But as far as Alex Alexeyev is concerned, to get back to the main point here, him being arrested, if you're trying to be in the good graces or of the organization that's paying you handsomely, getting arrested for drunken intoxication, well, that doesn't look too good on you. So let's dive into that in this first segment. Let's start off with what's becoming a concerning off-season development surrounding Alex Alexeyev, who was arrested early Saturday morning in Arlington, Virginia, and charged with public intoxication. And one of the things that I know is that the league takes it very seriously. And I understand that, especially around the whole Johnny Gaudreau thing and him being hit by someone like that was drunk. And I know that's not an apples for apples comparison, but they just don't have a lot of patience for players doing things like this. Now, the Capitals might show him some grace and, tell him to check into a program and get his head straight. But with that said, I also wouldn't be surprised if they cut ties with a guy that even, the public intoxication withstanding hasn't really lived up to, I think, what us as Capitals fans and the organization had hoped for. So here's what we know for sure. According to the Arlington County police, officers were on patrol at 3:30 a.m. When they responded to a report of a fight outside of a business. When they arrived, they reportedly saw Alexeyev physically assaulting another man. So it's not just that he was drunk in public and, singing to himself or stumbling all over the place. He was physically assaulting another man. That's what makes me really think, and kind of what reinforced my thought that this doesn't really look too good for him. And I don't think the Capitals organization is going to stand for it. As police attempted to intervene, he continued the altercation, and one officer had to deploy pepper spray to subdue him. So it is a situation that really boiled over the top. And a guy, like I say, that was put in the cryogenic deep freeze all season for the Capitals. Marty Faravari got injured, and he was the best option that the Capitals had. And, then he, had some teeth knocked out, and he was bubble boy for the duration of the playoffs there. But all things considered, wasn't the best defender, I guess I'm going to say, that the Capitals had out there. But this definitely did not endear him to the Capitals organization. He was treated for exposure, arrested, booked into Arlington County Jail, and later released. A Capitals spokesman said the team is, quote, aware of the situation, unquote, and gathering information. His agent has yet to make a public comment. And, like I say, this is, and I hate to lump it in these situations, but you see these people that struggle personally, and I'm going to bring this a little bit closer to home. I'm talking Alex Alexeyev and the issues that he had. Again, not the same issues, but some of these people that struggle personally, sometimes, well, their futures aren't that long in the National Hockey League. So this is not good for Alex. Now, what makes this so troubling isn't just the arrest, it's the timing and the player involved. Alexeyev isn't just some fringe call-up at the end of the day. At the end of the day, there was high hopes, and potentially could still be high hopes, for a Russian blue liner that was a first-round pick in 2018. And how the time flies. I remember when he was drafted. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but that's just the way life works. And I remember, that he was that next big, huge player on the Capitals blue line. Like I said, not the case. So he was that 2018 first round, 31st overall pick. The team drafted him expecting a reliable two-way defenseman who could anchor the blue line for years. While he hasn't become a top pair guy, he had a steady role within the organization. As we know here recently, helping the Capitals in their most recent pursuits in the playoffs. And, you take a look at it, that before this whole altercation, there was high hopes for him, that there was plenty of options for the Capitals to go with on the blue line. Some of them even on the big team, Dylan McIlrath, Ethan Bear, not to mention the talent that they had down in Hershey, that they chose him for a reason. But let's take a look at his trajectory. 21-22 made his NHL debut. 22-23 appeared in 32 games, collecting 5 points and showing flashes of promise. 23-24 played a total of 39 games, most of them down the stretch, infield and during injury absences. His play improved in the second half of the season, and he was trusted enough to log 14 minutes in a playoff game after taking a stick to the face and losing several teeth. That toughness was praised, and that quality that he had speak volumes about the character and what kind of competitor Alex Alexeyev is that, and I think I even talked about that if you take a look at the other pro sports, you see calf strains in the NBA, and they have to almost be carted off the court. That you take a look at Alexeyev, got some of his teeth knocked out and still continued to play. So quite something what these guys are able to put up. He's still on a cap-friendly contract, and organizationally, he's been considered part of the Capitals' depth on defense, especially with veterans aging out and injuries always looming. So you take a look at it, the 23-24 season, and then this season, he didn't get a whole lot of playing time, and a healthy scratch. And I think he knew that going in, that he saw the blue line and the way it was constructed, that unless a player really took a dip in production or got injured, that he was going to have to settle for making that sweet NHL money and sitting up in the press box in his fancy clothes. But some players, that's just what it's all about, just accepting your role. But if you listen to the other players on the team, they spoke glowingly of him, that he had a good attitude, a smile on his face, that he didn't get a lot of playing time in, but was an active participant in practice, didn't sulk, didn't moan, just understood what was expected of him. But now this arrest puts a serious dent in his trajectory. The Caps are looking to get younger, faster, and more disciplined, and this kind of off-ice behavior isn't part of that picture. And again, that is not a good look. And I was thinking to myself, that was my initial reaction in my head, that's it for him on the Capitals and potentially in pro hockey. Could the Caps move on? Will he need to earn back the trust at training camp? Yep. But I know that in these kind of situations that normally they give them the option to go to some rehab or something of that, so they can get in the right headspace and totally recover. And I get that. If that is an option that the Capitals are willing to give him and he is willing to do that, then I'm all about it. But it'll be interesting to see what kind of stance they take on it. We'll be watching this one closely at 25. Time is running out for Alexeyev to try and establish himself as a full-time NHL defenseman, and this incident could be a major setback on that. So all things considered, I'm hoping nothing but the best for Alex Alexeyev. Just kind of, I don't know what happened there other than the police report and what I read in the article that was put out there by the Arlington Police Department about what happened there. I'm guessing that alcohol, of course, was involved, but people's mouths were probably running, and the person that stepped up to him probably didn't realize that he was stepping up to an NHL player that was not going to cower away from a fight. Again, this is just me kind of painting the image in my mind. I don't know exactly what happened, but that is what happens with alcohol and big personalities, is that in this case, Alex Alexeyev was involved in some sort of physical altercation. Not ideal, not the best look for his career, but it is what it is. The Capitals need to move on, and we wish nothing but the best for Alex Alexeyev. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Andrew Cristall, one of the key pieces in the Capitals organization, one of the last players cut at training camp. There was high hopes that maybe he was going to join the Capitals this past season. What does this mean for him joining the Bears, and what does that mean going into the fall? I'll discuss straight ahead. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller longer. Now, this is my perfect go-to snack. Oftentimes, having kids, running to work, I need a quick protein boost, and Wonderful Pistachios is just that. So whether I'm in my car, running to work, dropping the kids off at school, or going to work, that is what I love about Wonderful Pistachios. High protein and good for me. I'm not reaching for a donut. I'm not reaching for junk food. I'm reaching for something that is truly good for me. So get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So the big news surrounding the Capitals and Andrew Cristall is that he is going to be joining the Hershey Bears, and it'll be interesting to see the kind of production that he gets playing pro hockey. You know, we saw what he was able to do in camp, but to see what he is able to do on a bigger stage will be quite something. Maybe a bit of a dress rehearsal for the Capitals, and just to kind of see what he has in the tank against some truly elite level talent. So let's dive into that in the second segment here. A bit more exciting than the first segment is Andrew Cristall is officially headed to the pros. On Monday, the Caps announced that Cristall has been reassigned from the Spokane Chiefs of the WHL to the Hershey Bears in the AHL. That means the 2023 second rounder is getting his first real taste of pro hockey. I'm loving it. And, I was one of the guys, and it had to do with his entry-level contract that he couldn't play more than, 8-9 games, or he'd burn the first year of his entry-level contract. And at the end of the day, it was the right move for the Capitals because we saw what he was able to put up with Kelowna. We were able to see what he was able to put up when he got dealt out to the Spokane Chiefs, that his game grew by leaps and bounds. And I think that, oftentimes we get a bit giddy with the idea of these young players like Ryan Leonard. And, guilty of it. If you listen or watch this show, I've talked about Ryan Leonard, and I can't wait for him to be on this team. But I think it's important to temper expectations because we saw what Ryan Leonard put up, one empty netter, that it's not always just being shot straight to the moon. But for Andrew Cristall in particular, this is a good opportunity to show what he has on a bigger stage, playing pro hockey in the American League, quite something. So let's talk about what he did in the juniors. It was historic, if you must know. 132 points in 57 games, 48 goals, 84 assists, led the entire WHL in scoring. Second in goals, assists, and plus minus, dominated in the playoffs with 41 points in 19 games, including 21 goals, the most in the postseason. So you take a look at what Andrew Cristall has been able to put up, and it is nothing short of stellar and quite inspiring. And it has me as a Capitals fan quite enthusiastic about going into the fall about Andrew Cristall and Ryan Leonard, these two faces of the next wave of Capitals, if you will, that to see how they're going to be able to grow into their role. And is it possible that Andrew Cristall plays well enough to earn a spot on the big team? I'll touch on that a little bit later here, but Cristall, who started the season with Kelowna before being traded to Spokane in January, also became the first WHL player this century to hit 400 career points. So he walks the walk and talks the talk. And what are some of the things that we know about him? Is that initially it was said that he would have gotten higher in the draft, but his size was something that was held against him, and his skating. Well, he can't do a whole lot about how tall he is. He tried to bulk up a little bit, and he hired a skating coach to try to be the best player that he possibly can. But as far as, taking a look at his statistics, 400 career points, that's quite something. That's a stat that screams elite offensive potential, something the Capitals are sorely looking for. And keep in mind, this is the same league that Connor Bedard just tore it up a year before that. So quite something. What He has been able to put up Andrew Cristall, and it's a good developmental league for this young talent to really kind of take your game to the next level, and that is what we have witnessed with him as well. He's not just a flash in points either. At 5'10" and 183 pounds, Cristall uses a combination of vision, shiftiness, and a high hockey IQ to control the game offensively. Oftentimes you hear about hockey IQ and you think to yourself, well, what does that mean really anyway? It's just certain players see the ice very well, and that is one of the things that he does. And I think that once he's fully engaged and fully gets a full grasp on what is going on and how to play pro hockey, I think that he is going to take to it like a fish to water. Now, the question is, how quickly can he adapt to the pro level? He'll start in Hershey, but if he shows he can handle the physicality and pace, don't be surprised if he gets a look on the big team next year. It is a very real possibility, and I think a lot of this is, within his control. That if he just totally kills it, I guess we don't know what's going to happen to Hershey in the playoffs here. It's, I guess let all of that take care of itself. But the opportunity that he is afforded, if he can make the most of that, then I think anything is possible. GM Chris Patrick made it clear this week the organization values what Cristall brings. He's a big part of the long-term plan, especially as the team looks to retool around younger, dynamic forwards. And, some of these players, are they going to be ready next year? Maybe, I guess it could be years, maybe a couple years from now. I think that for sure, Ryan Leonard is going to be a lock on joining this team or being on this team next season. But like I say, with Cristall, a lot of it will be determined on what he does at Hershey and what kind of camp he has. But the bottom line here is Cristall could be the most exciting offensive prospect the Capitals have had since they drafted Evgeny Kuznetsov. Big praise, but so far he has earned it. You take a look at it, just kind of circling back to Kuzi there for a moment. I remember the hype that surrounded him, and we saw glimpses of greatness. Of course, we saw a big picture that it kind of ebbed and flowed. The guy that said I could be the greatest player if I wanted to be, but never really was. We don't hope that Cristall is exactly what Kuzi was, but high praise for Cristall, who I think if you take a look at the makings of what kind of player he is, could be absolutely next level for this team. It'll be a fun storyline to follow. That much I know for sure. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Hendrix Lapierre and the opportunity that ostensibly will be afforded him next year to try out at that third line center position. Does he have what it takes? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the final segment of the show here, I'm talking about Hendrix Lapierre. In yesterday's show, I spoke more broadly about the third line center position, but in this episode, I'm talking about Hendrix Lapierre and his time with the Capitals. It's been a bit of a bumpy ride. Going into this season, I think that he thought to himself that this is the year that I call the Capitals home. Wasn't the case, but this has kind of been what we've seen from Hendrix Lapierre pretty much through his entire time within the organization, is that he's given opportunities, he'll come on strong, but then that cools. And then all of a sudden he's getting reassigned to Hershey. And what we have heard here is that Chris Patrick and Spencer Carberry have had to have a bit of a heart-to-heart conversation with him about what they need to see from him so that he will be able to be an NHL player, and more specifically a player on the Capitals. So let's dive into that in the final segment. Let's talk about Hendrix Lapierre, the 2020 first-round pick whose season didn't go the way anyone expected, but may still have a happy ending. maybe. I guess anything is possible. The way I look at it is that he is really going to have an about face with what we have seen from him thus far. But after a strong finish to the 23-24 season, Lapierre entered this season penciled in at that third line center position. And, we saw pretty good glimpses of greatness in the preseason. He had speed, vision, and some playoff experience. But once the puck dropped, things fell apart. In 27 games, Lapierre registered only 8 assists and a -3 rating and eventually found himself scratched. The energy, confidence, and creativity that marked his rise was suddenly gone. And he was one of the players at trade deadline that I thought potentially could be on the move. There was some rumblings out there that potentially the Penguins were kicking the tires on him, as that is another team that is a little behind the 8 ball with where the Capitals are at in their rebuild process, a team that tried to squeeze as much as they could out of that aging core. Now, you saw what they did in the standings, what they did during the regular season, that they're looking for big changes. So that is ultimately why they were trying to get younger and ultimately kicking the tires on Hendrix Lapierre. At the end of the day, if the Capitals could have gotten a good return on him, I wouldn't have been opposed to it. But Chris Patrick spoke honestly about saying, quote, "We had a good hard talk with him when we sent him down to Hershey about what the expectations are," unquote. And to Lapierre's credit, he responded like a pro. Down in Hershey, 32 points in 32 games, reestablished himself as a playmaker and earned praise not just from the coaches, but from the analytics staff tracking his impact. But, again, to circle back to that, we've seen this movie before from Hendrix Lapierre, where he plays well in Hershey, but not every player, despite where you are drafted, is cut out for playing in the National Hockey League. That is just a cold, hard reality. In the playoffs, he's added 3 assists in 7 games and has been a consistent contributor as the Bears fight to stay alive. And the Bears, a team that historically has done great things, a great developmental league for a lot of these young players. But we need to see more. More importantly, he's playing with confidence, which is huge, and showing the speed and awareness that made him such an exciting prospect. And there is a lot of excitement that surrounds him. It's just, listen, if there's a guy that's rooting for Hendrix Lapierre, there's no bigger guy out there than me, hoping that he can do the thing that he wants to do, and that's play pro hockey for the Capitals. If you listen or watch to this show, a couple summers ago, I said it needed to be the year for Connor McMichael, that these young players, if they can live up to potential, I love it when they're able to make good on that. It's just a bit of a question mark on Hendrix Lapierre as his trajectory has flattened out a little bit, shall we say, at least if I'm going to compare what we saw from him last season here on the Capitals. So what does that mean for him next year? We do know that the Capitals acquired Lars Eller to help stabilize that third line center position and did an okay job. But Lars Eller most assuredly will not be coming back next season. And that means that Hendrix Lapierre, along with Connor McMichael and fill in the blank with whatever other player, is going to get their chance at a kick at the can at that third line center position. My hope is that if it's Hendrix Lapierre year, that he can step up and be the player that this organization has thought that he is. But he's not going to have a give me. We do not want to go into next season with a subpar third line again. And I'm not just talking the third line center. I'm talking the third line period. And I think that Chris Patrick he's going to make a mandate to make that third line better. That if it's not Connor McMichael or Hendrix Lapierre, that he's going to go out and acquire someone, that we don't have that weakness that was exposed, at least in part, in the playoffs. But you take a look at it, the Caps are still looking for consistency and reliability in that spot. And Patrick has said internal competition will be part of that solution. And Lapierre is firmly back in that mix. So it'll be interesting. I think that it is going to be Lapierre and Connor McMichael fighting for that position. I guess in a perfect world, if Lapierre could, and this is just, this is a very big, if he is capable of doing it, that would be an ideal situation if he could be that third line center position and kind of keep Connor McMichael where he is at. But the flip side of that coin, however, is that Connor McMichael really wants to play center and excels when given the opportunity. What we saw from Connor McMichael, though, last season is that he was playing primarily on the wing just because, well, that's where he fit in. So it's going to be interesting to see next fall what happens. Do the Capitals go out and acquire someone in July during free agency to try to rectify that situation? Is there another player in-house that they could possibly slot in at that third line center position? But I think the front runners right now, of course, would be Lapierre and Connor McMichael, and question mark about whatever Chris Patrick has up his sleeve. Interesting times to be a Capitals fan. Is this team that played very well, winning the Eastern Conference, the Metro Division, is not quite where it needs to be yet. Close, but I expect some moves to take place this offseason. Are they going to take a big hack and try to go after a Nikolai Ehlers? Are they going to try to go after a Brock Besser type player? That remains to be seen. Those are the big, sexy marquee things. But I think it's also the secondary and tertiary moves, like the third line. And trying to address that as well. A lot of the positions for the Capitals are buttoned up. The blue line concerns, the net minding situation is taken care of for years to come. But there are still some question marks surrounding this team. Questions that Chris Patrick and the Capitals will have to answer. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week. Available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.